What's up everybody, Commander Sanctum here, and today we have a brand new deck tech using Electro Assaulting Battery. Electro is a 2/3 human villain for 1 red that has flying, you don't lose unspent red mana, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery add a red mana, and when Electro leaves the battlefield, you may pay X to deal X damage to target player. Electro is a great commander in that he's both a value engine and a payoff, all in one. Very thematic too. I love how he's all about storing up energy, or red mana in this case, before releasing it in one big burst when he leaves. While there isn't too much in mono red to really help abuse the leaving the battlefield trigger, other than him, obviously, dying, we have plenty to work with when it comes to storing up red mana, and using it elsewhere. For this deck tech, we'll focus on just that, gaining as much red mana as possible, and then using it to kill people in one shot. We'll also have a bit of a Spellslinger theme to help do some consistent damage to our opponents to make sure we don't need as much mana stored up when we get around to actually ending the game. With that, let's get into the card highlights. We'll start out by looking at some good consistent mana generators. We have a number of them that work very similarly to Electro, netting us a red mana whenever we cast an instant or sorcery. Ashling Flame Dancer technically needs us to cast 3 instants or sorceries in a turn to get the effect, but gives us 4 mana if we do so. She also has Electro's Don't Lose Mana ability, making for a good backup in cases where Electro may not be able to get out onto the battlefield. Urabrask is more like Electro, gaining 1 mana whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, but has the added benefit of also dealing damage to an opponent when you do so. Unfortunately, it's a single opponent and not each, but still, every point of damage matters. Birgi, God of Storytelling, has the 1 mana effect, but for every spell you cast, not just instant sorceries. This makes Birgi one of the absolute better ones in this category, since she counts creatures, artifacts, and enchantments as well. Braid of Fire is a red mana generator that can easily spiral out of control the longer it stays on the battlefield. Since the mana from it won't disappear with Electro out, it basically acts as an exponential increase in red mana, letting you gain enough mana to end the game much quicker than usual. Koth of the Hammer can net you a huge burst of red mana all at once with his -2 ability. Since we're mono red, we're naturally going to have a lot of mountains at our disposal, making his effect absolutely monstrous later in the game. Soulbright Flamekin is a nice way to turn 6 mana into 8 from 1 effect. The best part about this card is that it lets you activate on each turn, including your opponent's. Since our red mana won't be disappearing between turns, we'll be able to net 2 mana on each person's turn, making for a whopping 8 extra mana a turn cycle in a 4-player game. For one-time bursts of mana, we have access to some of the best storm cards out there, Rituals. These are instant and sorceries that give us more output mana than we put into them. Desperate Ritual and Pyretic Ritual are 2 such examples, both costing 2 mana and giving you 3 in return. Combine these with Electro's instant or sorcery ability, and they'll actually give you 4 mana in total, making for good ways to at least slightly increase your mana pool. Seething Song is another common ritual, costing 3 mana to output 5, or 6 if you also have Electro out. Mana Geyser is by far the best and most used ritual card, since it can give you a huge burst of mana all at once, especially later in the game. While Mana Geyser is generally only used to end the game on the spot in most decks, it really doesn't need to be that for us, since the mana will stick around for as long as Electro is out. Since our main goal is to burn out our opponents, likely in one shot, we can use some cards that deal damage to them whenever we cast certain spells. After all, the lower our opponent's life totals, the less overall mana we'll need to kill them with things like Electro's Leaves ability. Firebrand Archer, Coruscation Mage, and Kessig Flame Breather are all such examples that do the same thing. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, they'll do 1 damage to each opponent. Since we're already loading up on instants and sorceries, these cards are great sources of extra damage, and even more beneficial since they also count any artifacts or enchantments we may also end up casting. The next 3 cards in this category are specific to instants and sorceries, but have some additional upside to them. Well, except for Electrostatic Field, which is like the previous 3 cards, dealing 1 damage to each opponent, but only on instant or sorcery spellcast. Of the selection of cards we have, this is probably the worst one due to the restrictions. Gutter Snipe and Fiery Inscription, however, both deal 2 damage to each opponent whenever you cast an instant or sorcery. Like I mentioned before, the more damage we can do to our opponents before unleashing the full potential of our mana pool, the better, and these 2 cards help out with that immensely. Since we have a number of cards that care about us casting instants and sorceries, whether it's to deal damage or generate mana, we can use a special type of spell-slinging card to get the most out of them. Cantrips. Cantrips are cheap cards, mana-wise, that replace themselves by letting you draw a card as part of their effect. Crimson Wisps and Expedite are two such examples of this, giving a creature haste and replacing themselves, all for 1 mana. Ancestral Anger is similar, instead giving trample and a +1 power boost to a creature, again for 1 red mana. For some more 1 mana cantrips, we have Might of the Meek, Crash Through, and Warlord's Fury, the first two of which give a creature, or all creatures, trample, with the last giving all your creatures first strike for the turn. Most of these cantrips we have access to will give some benefit to a creature, which may or may not be useful depending on the situation. Again though, the real reason for these cards is the cheap instant or sorcery cast that can trigger our other cards' abilities. Rile is another trample-giving cantrip that also has a slight downside of dealing 1 damage to a creature you control. This 1 damage will mostly be irrelevant, but who knows, maybe Electro has 2 damage marked on him and you want to kill him off to get his Leaves trigger to activate, then this will be a perfect way to achieve that. Overmaster is the one cantrip that you'll want to use more strategically. Since it makes the next instant or sorcery you cast to be uncounterable, you'll want to fire this off right before using your game-ending spell that kills off the rest of your opponents. Speaking of which, since we don't want to just rely on Electro's ability to end our opponents, we have access to a few great X spells that can do so as well. Jaya's Immolating Inferno is probably the most efficient of them, since it naturally targets 3 things, making for a great mana dump to try to end everyone in 1 fell swoop. Comet Storm is similar to the Inferno, but requires an additional 2 mana to be able to target 3 players, making it a bit less efficient, but still a great mana dump if needed. Fall of the Titans only targets 2 players and has a much worse mana cost, but its surge ability should be easy enough to achieve in a deck like this, and is a good backup in cases where one opponent may have already been taken out of the game. Since our goal is to cast as many spells as possible to generate as much mana as possible, why not use ways to cast some of our spells more than once? For this, we have Past in Flames, which gives all instants and sorceries in our graveyard flashback. Since most of our instants and sorceries will either generate us a surplus of mana, or replace their mana when cast with Electro out, this is a great way to really surge up our mana if we need to start over and do it again in a game. Mizzix's Mastery takes this a step further when overloaded, letting you cast all of the instants and sorceries in your graveyard for free. Other than the initial cost of 8 mana, of course. Still, this will be another one of those cards that you can easily fire off to then almost immediately end the game if you have one of the previously mentioned game-ending cards. I'd be remiss if I didn't call out my absolute favorite mono-red card draw spells, especially since they fit so well with our theme of big mana. Unexpected Windfall, Big Score, and Pirate's Pillage are all great card draw sources for this deck, since they're all instants or sorceries and leave behind treasure when they resolve. Since treasure is effectively mana, these cards make for great mana generators on their own, while also checking pretty much all the other boxes we want from them. Endless Atlas is an often overlooked card, but one that I think works very well for monocolored decks. This is especially true in mono red, which already doesn't have the greatest card draw in the world, making it an effective include in my opinion. Faithless Looting also gets a special shout out for this deck, since it's card draw that initially costs 1 mana and can be flashed back, making it a great sorcery to trigger all of our other cards' various abilities. Finally, we have a number of utility cards that fit with our overall themes. Bolt Wave is great in that it's both a sorcery and deals 3 damage to each opponent, all for 1 mana. Between being a sorcery, costing a single mana, and dealing damage to each opponent, this card pretty much covers every single category of cards we want in this deck. Aria of Flame may give our opponents some life when it enters, but the fact that it deals increasing damage to our opponents for each instant or sorcery we cast makes the original life gain extremely negligible for us. Descent into Avernus is another card that deals increasing damage the longer it stays on the battlefield, while also giving us additional mana in the form of treasures, again hitting multiple categories of cards that we want to use. Strike It Rich is a great way to generate some extra mana, while also being a cheap sorcery. The flashback isn't too bad either, even though it would be a net loss of mana unless we have multiple mana generators out. Since we're all about maximizing our mana, what better way than to make our spells cheaper? The Fire Crystal does exactly this, while also giving us some additional, albeit situational, benefit. Stormkiln Artist is another treasure generator for us, all for the cheap cost of casting an instant or sorcery, which we'll be doing throughout the game anyways. Leyline Tyrant is basically like having a second copy of Electro, since it effectively does the exact same thing, minus the mana generation effect. Still, if Electro keeps getting countered or otherwise kept off the battlefield, this can be a great alternative option to get a similar effect. Doubling Cube is going to be absolutely crucial in this deck, since we're all about big mana that doesn't disappear between phases. Seriously, being able to double your unemptying mana pool every turn will put those game-ending cards into kill range extremely quickly. Finally, since mono red is pretty horrendous at land ramp, I wanted to specifically call out Wayfarer's Bauble. Being able to ramp out a basic land, even if only once, is nothing to scoff at, especially in a deck where we want to generate as much mana as quickly as possible. Here's an example deck list utilizing all the previously mentioned cards. Additional cards include some effective mana rocks in Pyromancer's Goggles and Scepter of Eternal Glory, impulse-based card draw in Ren's Resolve and Reckless Impulse, and another great mana generator in Neheb the Eternal. There's so many cool aspects of Electro that it's hard to pick a favorite. The fact that he's so thematic in generating mana and then using it to trigger a large explosion, the fact that he's a mono-red Spellslinger and pseudo-storm commander all in one, or just that his name is an absolutely great pun on the term assault and battery. He really is the definition of that old "I'm a fire in my laser" meme. From a more gameplay perspective, I think he'll be a fun one to play and even play against. He'll have the same drawbacks as any type of build-up commander has. He's very reliant on persisting on the battlefield to both store up mana and have a large enough payoff with his ability. So if he's consistently killed or countered, it'll be hard to do much in the game. There's also the common drawbacks of being in mono red. What with the nearly non-existent land ramp, the less than ideal card draw, the inability to deal with enchantments, and so on. Still, I think Electro will make for a nice bracket 2 commander for anyone that wants to have fun in a game and have the potential for an absolutely explosive and out of nowhere end to the game. If that sounds like you, give Electro a try. I don't think you'll be disappointed. I hope you enjoyed watching this deck tech on Electro Assaulting Battery. The full deck list outlined in this video can be found at the Archidect link at the top of the description. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to drop a like and comment, as well as subscribe to the channel for more Magic content. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.